Yes, indeed.
Recently, I've started playthroughs of Bloodborne, Sekiro, and Dark Souls 1, and have Dark Souls 2 installed. Surprisingly though, of the linear FromSoft titles, I've only finished Dark Souls 3. I've played it twice at this point, and it's become one of my favorite games. Something that has defined FromSoft games is boss design. While I'm definitely partial to Elden Ring's bosses over any other games, Dark Souls 3 has some that could have been better alongside some of my favorite bosses to date. Due to the relative simplicity of Dark Souls 3's bosses compared to Elden Ring, the bosses were easier to fight once I got to them. The real challenge for me came from the level design, as I had only played dungeons like that with the option of leaving and going back to the open world. To make this video simple, I decided to share as many thoughts in as little time as possible. Therefore, I'll be describing all 19 bosses with one paragraph each, while rating them in a tier list. A reminder that this is just my opinion, and many of these could be my favorite on any other day. Because of that, to better signify who I have preference toward, I'll have 3 triple S ratings, with one of those getting a plus to signify my absolute favorite. I will be going in-game order other than the last 2, which are a little bit out of that order, but only because the list works better that way. Without further ado, I hope to do these bosses justice. The tutorial boss is the first of 2 iterations of Gundyr. His first phase is the same, but the second phase turns him into a snaky boy. As the first boss in the game, it's a terrific tone-setting fight. Every swing from his halberd and slam with the serpent makes for a heavy-hitting boss that I love. His armor design is terrific, and his animations are really expressive. The boss is simple enough for a tutorial while not feeling like paper. He's an extremely cool boss, but relative to his other iteration, I'd wager this one is a strong B tier. The valiant watchdog of the High Wall, Vordt brings a frosty hammer and a fun moveset. A quadrupedal enemy that charges to begin his second phase, the frostbite damage from his moveset, and an overall cool boss design makes him a fun early game fight. However, he's relatively easy as most of his strings are 1 or 2 attacks long, and his second phase offers a breath attack that lets you get up to about 4 charged heavies if you use your stamina well while standing behind him. Still, this fight is fun, and he's a great early game test of your dodge rolls and attack timings. He's not too challenging, so I'll give him a B tier rating as well. Fun fight to continue the good tone of the bosses moving forward. Colossal enemies can be really cool when done well, but with this one being a strict gimmick fight to do any damage makes it so I'm not a big fan of this boss. Its first phase is also annoying because you have to deal with smaller enemies running around it, which already worsens the fight in my opinion. Its second phase can also be a drag if you play it safely and really troublesome to play aggressively. The third hand at its front is fast and really hard to see with rough camera work. Overall, I'm going to put this boss in D tier. It's not that hard of a boss, but it feels like the annoyance of the fight makes it more dreadful to run back to every time. I'll be honest, I'm not as picky about spellcasters as some other Souls fans, but this one could have turned out far better. The first phase is manageable, where you chase down the sage, and after an attack or 2, he'll teleport elsewhere in the arena. This makes his second phase a cool enough idea. More sages pop up, and until you see the color of the crystal ball they're holding, you don't know if they're the real one or not. You can take some guesswork out by knowing he'll be near a wall, but it still makes the second phase annoying, when the clones will spawn near the wall as well. I also feel like there are too many projectiles coming at you for this early in the game. I don't hate the premise, but I'm still going to give this boss a D tier. This is another fun boss fight that's a fun concept, but has a hiccup for me. In this fight, an orb floats around between many enemies, and the way to win the fight is to kill the enemy with said orb. The second phase, the orb stays put with the leader of the diaconate with the entire body of them surrounding him. It's a DPS test for the player, but for someone who's not really a fan of claustrophobic fights, it's not a great boss in my eyes. I'm going to put them in C tier because they're a fun concept that I'm just overall not as endeared by. On the other side of the Crucifixion Woods is a really neat boss fight. When you enter, there's one enemy standing, but as you move through the arena, more of them stand up. If a certain one or two wake up, they assist the main watcher, but others will help you out and actually do damage to the ones fighting you. The second phase is completely one-on-one, and the single watcher now swings its weapon, creating waves of fire across the arena. This feels like the first challenging boss in the game to me. This boss can be backstabbed, which can take away from a boss fight, but the health pool for its point in the game makes it worth going for. This is a great boss fight, but I still think there are some that are even better. I will still give them an S tier and could definitely see this one being triple S on another day. Another Colossus fight, the one that I feel is far better than the Greatwood. The cutscene before where he spawns from the goblet is really dope. Another gimmick fight, though this time the gimmick is simpler and easier to get through. Eventually, the Skeleton King draws his sword, though if you destroy the golden bracelet on that arm, the sword is pretty moot. The dark pit he brings with him could kill you if you're not careful, which gives this fight some real danger even though it's relatively easy otherwise. In my opinion, this boss has a nice transition into the mid-game, and I would say it's deserving of a B tier. He's an excellent gimmick fight and a pretty awesome spectacle. Having fought one or two demon boys already after I missed this boss in the first go-round, backtracking to get to this boss was a pretty tame experience. I definitely was over-leveled for this fight the first time, and he's pretty easy anyway. A big fiery dude in the underworld with a big weapon who's coming to kill you. Pretty standard boss fight, not terrific but not immemorable. I'll give him a C tier, because he could have been a more impactful reason to get to the end of that dungeon, whereas he kind of just is there because it's his kingdom so far as I can tell. Yes, I know. Yhorm isn't the next one a lot of people would go after because you usually wouldn't go through the Irithyll dungeon first, but I did it this way on my first run. Yhorm is another neat gimmick fight, and while I'm usually not one for a lot of gimmick fights, the Storm Ruler is a fun weapon to use against this enemy. The character design is really cool, and again, gimmick fights aren't my favorite, but I will give the big fella a worthy B tier. As another Lord of Cinder, he's definitely powerful, and I'm glad there's a fun way to make this fight winnable without making him too trivial. One of the bosses I could see in my number one spot on a different day. His first phase is a technical dual sword wielding knight, complemented by his second phase where he creates duplicates of himself. These shadow clones double attacks and make the timing of your dodges more crucial. His fire and magic are a cool combination, and his design makes me happy to fight this boss. I'll be giving this boss my first triple S tier of the video because he was the first boss in this game to really make me say, this is exactly what I am looking for from this game. This boss is a mixed bag for me. He's a Lord of Cinder, and one you get to midway through the game. Another teleporting boss, which doesn't always land well, and another spellcaster could have made this boss a crazy hell to fight through. However, he really only has one overly challenging attack to beat, which is his raining arrows, the second phase making it longer. However, once you get close, his health pool isn't egregious, and I can't think of another attack that's super challenging to work through. I will give his fight a solid B tier. What is it with the Boreal Valley and having some of the coldest bosses? Yes, pun intended. The Dancer is another fun sword fight, which I am all for. The first phase is pretty slow and pensive, but the second phase is far more wild and even more fun to fight. While the swords seem erratic, they're well balanced to be avoidable, but still dangerous if you miss your timings. The Dancer also has a plunge attack where it digs its abyssal sword into the ground and makes an AoE around itself, which is pretty cool, but definitely not game-breaking. I will give this boss an A tier rating because the first phase can be pretty sluggish if the boss won't attack, but otherwise, this boss is pretty great. There is nothing bad about the Dragonslayer Armour. My friend Jake put it a great way that you're not really fighting its axe. You're fighting its shield. The shield completely erases damage, so you have to get around its back or avoid its attacks and strike when the shield isn't raised. It's a well-balanced boss, and it's another I could see being my number one on any given day. It's a technical fight, and his arena is worthy of an extra round of applause. I love gritty, boots on the ground, face-to-face battles, and the Dragonslayer Armour is a fantastic example. This boss encompasses everything that I personally love about Souls bosses. I will give this one an S tier, although I would give it triple S if I wasn't only giving out 3. Ocerios is one of the more unique bosses in the game. I like this boss fight. His second phase sees him shed his large staff and really go wild. This boss fight is unique and fast-paced the entire time. The characterization sells the insanity of this consumed king, missing his beloved ocelot. His dialogue and screams really EB my GBs. I wouldn't say he's my favorite fight, but seeing as he's not a gimmick fight or one with a lot of insanely unavoidable attacks, I'll give him a pretty strong S tier. Not the cream of the crop, but a unique design and a fun boss to fight, especially in the late game. 2 new areas become accessible after defeating Ocerios, one of which leads to the second iteration of Gundyr. The serpentless champion version has some insane strings and combos, including my favorite, where he juggles you with the halberd and sends you across the arena with a kick in the chest. One of the absolute hardest hitting bosses in the game and possibly the series. Champion Gundyr is one of my personal favorites. The halberd, still amazing, and I think he's well worth fighting again, this time in his stronger form. Overall, I will give him S tier, and again, could see him being triple S tier as well. Another one of my favorite fights in the game overall. This fight starts with you fighting the older brother named Lorian. His great sword is imbued with Cinder, and his teleporting keeps you on your toes. Then, Lothric revives the legless carcass of Lorian for a fun piggyback ride to add some projectiles. They definitely could have jacked up the rate at which Lothric throws these projectiles. As the last Lord of Cinder, they really did not go overboard with him. Then, while I predicted it before it happened, killing Lorian only for Lothric to revive him reminds the player who they're really fighting. Overall, I'll give this boss an S tier, although it seems fairly easy for a late game boss if you're leveled correctly. The first time I fought the Soul of Cinder, my jaw dropped. Basically, having a 5-phase boss fight makes it super challenging, considering it has 4 different weapons in its first stage and can heal after you deplete his health bar with a totally new moveset, makes him one of the best designed bosses in my opinion. It's one of my favorite that I fought in Souls so far, with its lightning attacks, its magic projectiles, and of course, the slew of fire attacks and buffs. The extra, though smaller health bar really complements how good of a fight they believed this boss to be, which is why I am giving it my second triple S tier. This is one of the best bosses in the Soul series, and I'm so happy that I was able to beat this boss twice to make it to the end game. F tier. So for the Nameless King, I'm going to cheat and use 2 paragraphs, but it's because I feel like my favorite boss is worth 2. The Nameless King is known for being the hardest boss in Dark Souls 3, and while I've been spoiled by the mechanical marvels that are Elden Ring's bosses, this boss was still an amazing experience. His arena, the dungeon leading up to him, the bell, the fog bridge you walk up to and fight him on, the Stormdrake entrance, the technical challenge of the second stage, and the overall presentation of this boss really makes him the absolute most boss's boss that ever bossed. I love the lightning weapon, and I will be definitely making a lightning run with his spear through New Game Plus at some point. A part of me wishes that I had struggled more against this boss, but I'm also glad that I didn't try it like I did with a bunch of the easier bosses. Overall, I love this boss so much, and the Stormdrake part of its fight is fair, but still a challenge you have to figure out. I am, of course, going to give my favorite boss the third and final triple S, and I will add the plus to it since it is my absolute favorite in this game. I will always love getting to this boss fight. So that's my list, and I'm really glad to be back on YouTube. I know it's been way longer than just a little while, but I've been working through some things. I've got a great support system, including my family, my friends, and my wonderful partner who have all been supportive and amazing. I've been taking a break, obviously playing some video games. I do miss doing this content thing, and while it won't be regular for a while, I'm definitely glad to put another video up at all. So, if you've made it this far, thank you for watching, and I will see you guys soon.